Today I'm going to follow up our excellent lesson from our good friends at Schoolhouse Rock with some general tips on doing legislative research. Generally, the legislative process follows what's in that video, but in the context of Congress, it goes a particular way. First of all, and you need to think about this as you do legislative history, but also jot down as you go through when things are happening and what documents are filed. And I'll talk a little more about that. But generally, a bill will show up in either the House or Senate, and it will follow a process that takes it through that chamber and then goes back to the other chamber. So let's say a bill began in the House. It would first be sent to committee, and then in that committee, they'd either do something or kill it. And at every stage, a bill can die, and most bills do die. But if it goes further, they may hold hearings on it, and that will produce a document and mark up the bill. So there's the original bill, and the markup bill is going to be essentially a committee amendment. They report it out and write a report on the bill. That report will sometimes include legislative history, saying why they're doing various things in that bill. Note, from the time a bill is introduced and that bill goes through committee, those changes are important in determining the legislative history of that bill. If a provision is in an original bill and killed before it makes it through the whole process, a court's going to think that the legislature intended to kill that provision, and they're not going to put it back by interpreting it back in a case or through a reported decision. Then it goes to the floor. There's debates on it. Usually, and I always tell people to look for what seems to be the third reading or the last reading, because bills usually only get seriously debated at a couple of times. And one is the third reading or the reading right before the vote. Then it's gone to the other house. Now, along here, this report is going to be the House report. If it starts in the House report's going to be very useful. The hearings are going to be useful. They will be useful in the Senate, but generally they're going to do a more cursory thing. And it will either die quickly in the Senate or move quickly here, maybe skipping a lot of these steps because, well, first of all, the Senate's weird. They operate differently, but also generally when you've received a bill as a chamber, you feel that the bulk of the work is already done, and your business is either to kill, change, or move the bill rapidly to vote. So you go through the whole process again. If there are differences between the way the bill is treated, say there's an amendment, it goes to conference, and the conference will release a report called a conference report. It's different from a House report of a committee or a Senate report of a committee. I mean, it is the report of a committee, the conference committee, but what it usually has the text of what they've resolved to be the final version of the bill, and they vote on that. So they vote on that, they send it to the president, who either signs or vetoes it. At that point, it becomes a public law, a PL, a Pub L, and gets a cite. That cite is a very important cite for you as a legislative history researcher, because I think it's the most important datum to just go from database to database with. And then it goes its normal way and is regulated on, and those kind of things happen. In states, the system is really stripped down. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about Kentucky here. A bill is normally pre-filed or not, and then gets its first reading. Nothing happens on its first reading except it's referred to a standing committee, which could kill it. So it's reported out favorably with the substitute, or unfavorably. Actually, the unfavorably report probably won't happen because it'll have died before that. But if it's a close call in the there may be a report on that. It gets a second reading, and then nothing much happens there. So you jot it down in your notes, but there's not going to be any debate on it, and not much is going to happen there, except they may note that there's a committee change, but that would have happened before in the committee. If it is sent to the Rules Committee in Kentucky, it usually means it's dead. That's a convenient way to kill off a bill of long duration. The Rules Committee might hold it in its pocket and use it for something else. Maybe if it's a sewer bill, they'll shove a pension bill in it. But other than that, it's not going anywhere. Okay, you get a third reading. That's when the debate happens. So when you see in the survey of the, and we have readings on this, when you see in the kind of bill summary thing on the LRC's website that there's a third reading, that's the time you'll go back and look at KET to see what people said about it. More on that a little bit later, I think. If it's an ordinary bill, the majority of those voting will vote for it. If it's an appropriations bill or something that can be characterized as an appropriations bill, meaning that to some degree money of the state is directed to be spent, it requires the majority of all members, the whole number of members. So if there's 100 members of the House, it must be 51, not the normal, just barely a quorum number that vote on lots of things. Kentucky's legislature is still considered to be a part-time legislature. Most legislators have day jobs, so sometimes they don't get in for all votes. They'll usually make their way in for the important ones. And then if it's a constitutional amendment, it needs 2/3. It'll be sent to the other chamber and repeat. If the bill goes into conference, we will not know what happens with it. It will disappear in a hole, and then some sort of compromise will come out. Usually by the time it gets to that, they know they have enough votes for the compromise bill, and that goes very quick. And of course, then the governor either signs it or vetoes it. Unlike Congress, if it's in a budget or appropriations bill, the governor has a line item veto. One of the things you're going to do when you physically do a legislative history is you're going to be looking for documents and dropping them in a folder, whether it's on the cloud or in a physical folder, which if you go back far enough, you'll be dealing with books and copies and all that stuff. Although you can use your phone, there's lots of excellent phone scanning document apps out there that I use, and you don't always have to go to the copier. I hardly ever do anymore. The bill is one thing you want to do, and any amendments. Again, remember that if something is in the original bill and it's dropped, a court will assume, for the purpose of interpretation, that they meant to drop it. Any hearings, not usually important, but in cases like the 1976 Copyright Act, they're extremely important. You'll want to collect reports of the chamber where the bill originated. It's usually fuller. Then it'll go to the other chamber. In bills that are passed deliberatively over a period of time in regular order, and I'm old enough to still remember that, all the reports are important. But nowadays, with divisions, generally the important one is the one where the chamber where the bill originated and had support. Then there are debates, which is usually just talk. However, occasionally, for example, in there was a colloquy in the passage of the Oxley-Sarbanes bill, in which Oxley and Sarbanes answered questions about the bill's application to lawyers that represented corporations. That bill, of course, came out of Enron and had to do with the responsibilities of advisors to a corporation to be ethical and honest. That colloquy, which is in the debates, is legally relevant for interpreting that bill as it applies to lawyers, and courts have found that. And finally, if there's a conference report, you want that because that's the end bill. So things you jot in your notepad with the documents. If you're doing Congress, the public law number. That's what you're going to take to all legislative history tools. It's the easiest thing to look for. Not a public law, not a bill number or a popular name, although those can be useful. This will just make your life easier if you have that and punch it in. All your dates. In Kentucky, you can follow a lot of this stuff in the legislative record, or congress.gov, for Congress will carry this stuff, and the bill summary on the LRC website will have the dates of these readings. But that third reading is when people talk. So you take that date to the congressional record in Congress and find the debate. In Kentucky, there's no printed debate, so you're going to have to find the video on KET. KET records all open debates and committee meetings on its website. And it's very difficult to find them without a date, but it's reasonably easy to with the date. So the date and the name of the committee, or whether or not it is open date, is important. And then you just want to list the documents you found, because at some point you're going to want a narrative to tell people what happened with this bill. Now, one of the great ways to find federal legislative history is to let somebody else do it. Just let somebody else. Let somebody else. Here is these books over here in green, or the printed copy, 6 volumes of all of the legislative history of the tobacco settlement back in the 90s. And it has every document that Bill Manns, who's one of the 2 people at Hunt Online that in the past, although they've got new people that compile these things, they go through and do the legislative history and collect every document in one place. There's an online analog of that. That's the U.S. Federal Legislative History Library. So here, when you click on that, you go here. First thing I'm going to tell you is that the U.S. Federal Legislative History Title Collection is a slightly different database or way of thinking about finding these than the Sources of Compiled Legislative Histories database, which is actually more of a bibliography of all compiled legislative histories, but also law review articles and NGO, non-governmental organization reports on legislative history. So you go first here, and you can look by public law, you can look by publication title or popular name. See over here the Administrative Procedure Act. There are two different databases, and that kind of is trying to collect everything, and a couple of different people did them for different purposes. So if you go to the sources of compiled legislative histories databases, you're going to get everything. By the way, this indexes everything over here. So I always, just as a shorthand, because I'm telling you tips, I go over here, and then I do a thing where I check by public law number. That's going to be, presumably at any point in the legislative history, I'm starting with a statute I'm trying to find the legislative history of. So I know the public law number. It's in the Westlaw or Lexis or online place. I found that. So I go there, type it in. I might have to change the toggle to public law number. I could scroll down and do it with a browse by Congress, but I just type it in there right away. And it takes me to one document, which I can then click on. And over there, I click on that, and I get this list of all the documents. Now here, this bill that I picked is the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, sometimes known as the Obamacare Act, or ACA. And occasionally, if you were going to do acronyms, PPACA, but you rarely see that. But in fact, it's a bunch of different laws put together, what we think of, and other things having to do with mental health and biologics price competition. So that's one of the bills that got swept up into the ACA. But I'm looking at Bernard Reams. That's another one of Heinz' compiler, and he has a 17-volume in the real world version of this healthcare reform legislative history of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. But it's all available on Hein Online. And so you can go through here and click on the contents and look at every one of those volumes. The page is falling off here. These are screen captures. So it continues to go on. You can click here and look what's in there. I sometimes think going to the cumulative contents is a good idea, although I sometimes just jump into the document and look for the table of contents there, which is more nicely formatted. It's a PDF. Like many things on Hein Online, it's kind of different to work with than a Westlaw or Lexis database, and then it is a chunk of PDFs that are collected together and indexed to. So it's not like Westlaw or Lexis, the endlessly scrolling document. It is, in fact, things that you have to click through pages, and when it displays, it has the PDF analog of a printed page. However, you can also search the whole thing. Can't do that in the print version. So even though it's kind of laid out like a print version, you've got this great search by title. Remind you again on Hein Online, when you go to the top bar, you're going to search your overall library. But if there is an opportunity to search just the thing you're working on, it will be under its name a little farther down in the page, a little smaller. So just to learn to look for these, because they're always very helpful. So here I type in the word vaccine just to try it out, and I get 11 results. And you can see that that apparently the Vaccine Safety and Public Confidence Assurance Act had something to do with Obamacare, and there's several documents. I could look at that. So even kind of bringing it around to the kind of things we're searching for this class, even a database like that could be useful at looking at what Congress was looking as a snapshot of things. Okay, to sum this up, what we're trying to do with legislative history is to collect a bunch of documents, find the connections for them, to kind of figure out the picture of how a particular chunk of text made it into the statutes books as a live piece of legislation that has words in it that we just want more help at interpreting them. And that's what we're ultimately searching for in a legislative history, the legislative intent. Now, you will do legislative histories and find no legislative intent. In legal research, as in science, no result is a result. And you can confidently write that brief knowing that the other side isn't going to say, well, in its conference report or in the bill's move through the legislation, they dropped this provision. Therefore, what the other side is trying to interpret into this law is clearly was not intended to be part of it. So as you do that, keep in your mind